This weekend I had two out-of-town weddings. I just actually got back home a little bit ago. One was in St. Augustine and one was kind of in a part of Georgia that you probably would never go to. It's in the north central part of Georgia. So it was very beautiful to be at these weddings for parishioners that got married elsewhere. And something that I always notice at a wedding is the beauty of the ring. Beauty of the ring, because the wedding ring is placed on the finger that is close to the heart. And the wedding ring is made out of metal, usually a few diamonds interspersed in there, but I'm convinced that the number of diamonds doesn't necessarily equal the amount of love. So don't feel pressure that you have to have more diamonds in your ring and that shows how much love. It's the quality of the love that is given. It's not necessarily how many diamonds are in it. But I'm always intrigued by the rings because I've never seen really two that were alike. They're always very different. And the rings don't come out of a mine looking like a ring. It's a craft to be able to create a ring. It's a craft because the gold or the silver is mined, and then it is taken to a refiner, and then it is placed in fire. And that metal, it doesn't look like the ring. It has to get placed in the fire and it melts. And there's a certain point that the artisan knows when to take the metal out because they have to be able to form it perfectly so it looks like something that someone's going to want to wear the rest of their lives. And they know that it's ready. They know that that metal is ready when they can see their image in it. So just picture the artisan there, and they place the metal over the fire and it's melting, and suddenly it's not dull, it starts getting shiny. It gets purified. And then they take it out and they look and they see if they can see their image in that metal, well, they know it's ready to be formed. That's a lot of what God does to us. You see, God makes us, He forms us, He gives us the gift of free will. And He places us here on this earth, and He hopes we make good, holy decisions. But He also knows that there's times where we get into trouble. There are times when we need to be refined. And so our gospel today really addresses that because Jesus is speaking to a group of people, a continuation of the Sermon on the Plain, where He's telling them about being a disciple. And what does He say? The disciple is to be like the teacher. So that means that God is looking at us. And when God looks deep into your heart and my heart, what do you think He sees? Do you think He sees an image of Himself? Or is that image clouded with perhaps our own darkness? Is that image clouded with a little bit of haze of our sinfulness? Because the teacher, God, wants to look inside of us and see His image. We are made in His image and in His likeness. And Jesus talks about splinters, and He talks about goodness, and He talks about being a hypocrite, and He talks about picking up on everybody else's faults, but He very clearly says, look inside your own heart and see what is there. Because you need to have it cleansed and purified before you go picking on everybody else. And what gets us into the most trouble, do you think? What do you think gets us into the most trouble? Our actions can get us into trouble, no doubt, because they lead to sinfulness. But something that is often very ignored and not really thought about are our words. Because words come out of the mouth, but they are a reflection of what's inside the heart. And very often people use words that they regret later. Benjamin Franklin said, "A slip of the foot will heal in just a short period of time, but a slip of the tongue you may never get over." Because you cannot take your words back. We have to be so careful with our words. I don't think that people get into trouble sometimes for being silent. Because when we start speaking, especially when it's our opinions and our judgment, It's when we get into trouble, because that's God's department. And perhaps we need to have a filter with those words. It doesn't mean we don't hold people accountable. It doesn't mean we don't have a standard. But it means we think before we speak. And I think we have to translate that into the year 2019, because that means we think before maybe we type as well. On a text message, on social media, different things. I notice some people today, they rarely talk on the phone. As I mentioned, I was on a trip and I stop at Cracker Barrel, my favorite place, of course. I always no trip is complete without a stop at Cracker Barrel, at least one. And you look around the restaurant and there's a lot of people there, and sometimes nobody's talking. For a Cracker Barrel to be kind of quiet on a Friday night is pretty rare. But people are there texting. The kids are there. Sometimes you hear the noise of their video games. That drives me nuts in a restaurant, by the way. Why people play video games in the restaurant is everybody else is around you there. Be considerate. Okay, enough of that. We'll go back to the text messaging. So you notice and you look and people are there just typing away, and I don't know. I know sometimes I've received a text message by mistake, and I look at it and I'm like, well, this isn't for me, I don't think, but I'm shocked at the way people speak to each other in their messages. Because you probably would never say that in person. If you're not going to say it in person, then you don't write it either. Because it's not a cop-out. It shouldn't be hiding behind that veil, because it's going to be traced back to you. And that also talks about what's in the heart and what's in the mind, whether it's typed or whether it is spoken. Those words are like a feather pillow. With a feather pillow, if you open it up and you go outside, I don't recommend that you do this, but you go outside and you take it and you shake it out, those feathers are going everywhere. And then I challenge you, if you go and do that, go and pick up and find every feather. You'll never be able to find them all. In that same way as our words, we cannot get them back. We start Lent on Wednesday. Lent is a little later this year. Easter is a little later this year. Maybe it's providential for us that we have this reading right before Lent, because this is our time not to look at everyone else's faults, but Lent is a time to be interior. Lent is a time to look inside through prayer and fasting and almsgiving. Look inside your heart and see what is there. We have a few days before Lent. So as you're thinking about, what am I going to do this Lent? If you're giving up chocolate for the 35th year of your life, probably, you know what, this isn't doing anything for your spiritual life. So I would highly suggest you look a little deeper into the heart and come up with something maybe that is something more spiritual, of what are you going to actually do? How are you going to be converted? How will you be transformed this Lent? Don't be afraid to challenge yourself. Maybe it is with your words. Maybe you need to say every day during Lent, I'm going to pray to God for a filter, that I don't say the wrong things, that I'm careful about how I speak, that I don't just go picking out the splinter in everybody else's eye, but I'm afraid to look in the mirror. Now is the time, my friends, to look into that mirror, to see what is in that heart. Is it darkness? Does it cause damage? Or is the heart of goodness and it brings healing? God is looking at you for these next 40 days, these next 6-7 weeks. He's placing us over that fire. He's asking for us to be purified. And what is he really looking for? Most of all, he wants to be able to look inside your heart. And what does he want to see? Himself.